Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we cut through the noise to deliver the essential knowledge you need fast.
Great to be here.
Today, we are wrestling with, well, what feels like the defining leadership challenge of our era.
It really does.
How do you lead when public opinion can just mobilize instantly? A single mistake and boom.
A brand, a policy, even a whole career can just be destroyed overnight. It's intense.
So today we're doing a deep dive into exactly that, leading in an age of outrage.
And it really is the ultimate test of character, isn't it? Because that scrutiny, it's constant.
Right.
Leading today, it demands more than just competence. You need this fundamental integrity and, honestly, an almost ruthless resilience.
Ruthless resilience, I like that.
Yeah, and to figure out how leaders actually manage to survive, maybe even thrive in this kind of crucible.
Yeah.
We've pulled together a really fascinating stack of sources. We're talking ancient strategic wisdom from people like Cicero and Sun Tzu.
Okay, the classic.
Right, through to organizational psychology like, Pixar's brain trust model.
Oh, interesting.
All the way up to modern volatility theory from Nassim Nicholas Taleb, and even strategies from Navy SEAL teams.
Wow, that's quite a range, from ancient Rome to modern special ops.
Exactly. It's a broad sweep.
So our mission here is to really try and extract the principles that allow you, the listener, to stand firm when that inevitable social media storm hits.
And we have to start, I think, with a really critical look at the modern condition itself.
Which is?
The inherent fragility of our systems of authority in this incredibly volatile world. We need to understand fragility first.
Okay, define fragility for us then. What does Taleb mean by that?
He gives us a really clean, sort of non-negotiable definition. Fragility is simply the property of anything that experiences more downside than upside from random events or shocks.
So if something unexpected happens, you're more likely to get hurt than helped.
Precisely. If you're fragile, every little tremor, every unexpected bit of criticism, every anonymous online attack, it harms you significantly more than any potential benefit you might get from some positive surprise.
And what's really unsettling when you think about it in terms of, say, modern government or corporate culture, is this trap we seem to have built for ourselves. We're constantly trying to suppress volatility, aren't we?
We are. We seek to eliminate all the risk, all the randomness, all those little stressors in our complex systems. You see it in the economy, in politics, even in just how big bureaucracies are structured.
Trying to make everything smooth and predictable.
Exactly. But that impulse, that drive for total control and stability, that's actually the mechanism that creates the fragility.
How so?
Well, Taleb argues quite forcefully that when you deprive a complex system of that necessary volatility, those stressors, you're actually harming it.
Harming it by protecting it. That sounds counterintuitive.
It does, but think about it. The system either weakens through lack of use, kind of atrophies, or it builds up all the suppressed pressure until, eventually, it blows up in a massive catastrophic correction because it never learned how to handle the small stuff.
Okay, that makes sense. I think you used an analogy before, like muscle atrophy.
Exactly. It's a great analogy. If you spend, say, a month perfectly still in bed.
Your muscles don't get stronger.
Right. They waste away. Our systems, political, economic, corporate, they actually need constant small stressors, small failures, small criticisms, little market corrections. That's what keeps them strong and able to respond.
So by trying to eliminate all the small shocks, we basically guarantee that when the big one inevitably hits,
the system is too weak to handle it, it shatters. The suppression of that localized disorder, those small bumps, it pretty much guarantees systemic disorder down the line.
And the environment we're in now, it's just accelerating this risk, isn't it?
Absolutely. Our modern world is just defined by escalating nonlinearity, complexity, unpredictability. You see this explored really well in books like Team of Teams.
Nonlinearity, meaning things don't follow straight cause and effect lines anymore.
Pretty much. Interdependence and speed are now the main drivers of consequence. It used to be, maybe, an action led to one or two predictable outcomes.
Like you could model it, like hitting a pool ball.
Yeah, exactly. A two-ball problem, you hit the cue ball, you basically know where the target ball's going. Simple physics.
But now?
Now, your action. I mean, think about a tweet or an off-the-cuff remark.
Yeah.
It's linked to vastly more potential outcomes, almost instantly.
So that two-ball problem is now what?
Hundreds of collisions happening at once.
Yeah.
Tiny deviations, a slight shift in tone, that ill-advised tweet, an internal argument that leaks out, they can lead to massive, unpredictable, totally outsized impacts.
Chaos theory in action.
Pretty much. The risk of sudden chaotic escalation is just constant. And that is the environment leaders have to navigate today. It's fundamentally different.
Okay, so if fragility is the big danger and trying to suppress stress actually causes it.
Then the only way forward is to cultivate a kind of radical resilience.
More than just being tough.
Way more. We have to move our organizations and ourselves past simple robustness. Just resisting shocks to something much more proactive.
Which is?
Antifragility.
Antifragility. Okay, let's unpack that. How is it different?
Antifragility is where the system or the leader actively gains from disorder, from volatility, from randomness.
Gains from it, not just survives it.
Exactly. You don't just weather the storm. You actually get stronger because of the storm. It's a complete reversal of how we typically think about public crises or criticism.
But I want to push back on that a little. Doesn't trying to gain from disorder sound a bit, I don't know, like you're encouraging chaos or taking unnecessary risks? Where's the line?
That's a really crucial distinction. You're right. And Taleb addresses it with what he calls the asymmetry test.
Asymmetry test.
Yeah. The point isn't to, court disaster.
Right.
A leader or an organization is anti-fragile if they have a clear asymmetry. More potential upside than downside risk from shocks.
Okay, so fragile is more downside, limited upside.
Right. An anti-fragile one is structured so that volatility, like, say, public criticism or a sudden market swing, actually forces rapid learning and adaptation. That's the upside.
So the criticism itself becomes a stressor.
Exactly. A stressor that points out flaws you might not have seen internally. And that strengthens the system. And this is the key part, if you have the right structure in place to actually process that feedback and learn from it.
So the gut reaction to outrage shouldn't be panic and lockdown.
Oh.
But maybe, okay, how can we use the energy of this mess to actually improve our processes or get clearer on our purpose?
That's the anti-fragile mindset. But as you said, that requires a pretty fundamental psychological shift.
Which brings us neatly to the whole growth mindset idea, right, from Carol Dweck and others.
Indeed. Because the opposite, the fixed mindset, is maybe the single greatest psychological liability a leader can have in this age of constant scrutiny.
Why is it so bad?
Well, individuals who believe their capacity is fixed, that success comes from innate talent, not effort. They interpret any public setback, any rejection, any major criticism
as proof they don't have what it takes.
Exactly. As evidence they just don't possess the right stuff.
And in this kind of volatile, complex world we're talking about, you're basically guaranteed to have setbacks.
Guaranteed. So when those bumps in the road inevitably happen, the leader with a fixed mindset just gets easily derailed. They internalize the failure as, like, personal inadequacy.
And they freeze up.
They become paralyzed by the fear of more criticism. The whole system just locks down.
Whereas the growth mindset, that provides the resilience you need for anti-fragility.
It really does. It's the core belief that capabilities can be developed, that people can change, get smarter, learn to do better.
So instead of seeing a big public failure or, a C- on your performance review as proof you're incompetent,
you interpret it as an opportunity, a chance for rigorous improvement, for adaptation. That belief, that core conviction, acts as the psychological buffer. It allows a leader to face that continuous fire without just collapsing.
Okay, mindset is crucial, but what about strategy? If public outrage is a kind of conflict,
then we definitely need strategic wisdom. And we can draw a lot from the classics here, like Clausewitz or Sun Tzu.
What's the first rule, strategically speaking?
Conserving strength. Simple, but vital. If you're up against a truly resourceful, organized opponent, maybe a well-funded opposition group or a major competitor launching an attack.
You can't just charge in.
No, you have to conserve your strength. Prepare for an active, maybe long-term defense. Be smart about where you engage.
But what about the kind of threats that seem to define this age of outrage? The more nebulous, decentralized stuff, like an online mob.
Ah, right. That's where you shift into a different strategic mindset, what you might call small war tactics.
Small war.
Yeah. When you're dealing with a threat that doesn't have a clear center, like a decentralized rapid-fire online campaign, or just an endless stream of localized critiques popping up everywhere.
The traditional approach doesn't work.
Trying to find a decisive final battle to quash the whole thing, it's suicide. You'll exhaust yourself.
Because you can't possibly shut down every single person criticizing you online. It's impossible.
Precisely. So the strategy has to shift. You stop trying to crush the center, because there often isn't one. Instead, you focus on gnawing at the surface and the boundaries.
Gnawing at the boundaries. What does that look like in practice?
Think about it in military terms again. Instead of attacking the main force of a professional army head-on,
You do lots of small, scattered things.
Exactly. 1,000 small, dispersed actions. Like that analogy of armed peasants scattering.
Right, you mentioned that making every move the enemy makes dangerous and unpredictable.
Yes. Their main goal isn't necessarily to win a big battle. It's to make the cost of targeting them prohibitively high. They scatter everywhere. The moment a small unit of the professional army, maybe your PR team trying to respond, tries to move.
They get hit from unexpected directions.
Right. The dispersed critics or issues pop up at the rear on the flanks. It becomes impossible to predict where the next little fire will start.
So, applied to leadership in this digital age, it means don't give them one big, satisfying target.
Exactly. Don't let them focus all their energy on, say, one specific spokesperson or one single flawed policy explanation. Decentralize your response where possible. Make the effort required to target you effectively more expensive, more difficult than the actual damage being caused.
Focus on constant small corrections at the edges.
Rather than seeking that one final decisive battle against, the internet, which you'll never win anyway.
Okay, that strategic shift makes a lot of sense. But it leads us to another crucial point. Even the best system, the smartest strategy, it's all going to fail if the leader themselves is, well, fundamentally hollow or inconsistent.
Absolutely essential. Which brings us to the anchor of integrity and values, leading from the inside out.
That's Stephen Covey's term, right? The inside-out paradigm.
It is, and it's such a powerful framework for this. Covey argues that lasting effectiveness and that true resilience against external shocks we're talking about, it has to start with the inner core.
Your character, your motives.
Yes. Your character, your motives, your fundamental paradigms, basically, how you see the world. The core idea is, if you want respect, you first have to be respectable.
If you want a functional team.
You first have to be a trustworthy colleague yourself. It starts inside.
This links to his idea of private victories preceding public victories too, doesn't it?
Perfectly. Making and keeping promises to yourself, self-discipline, integrity that has to come before you can effectively keep promises to others or lead an organization. If you can't manage yourself, how can you possibly manage the perception, let alone the reality, of a global brand under fire?
And without that solid inner foundation.
Leaders fall right into that disastrous trap of the outside-in paradigm.
And those are the people who...
They feel victimized.
They
believe all their problems are external. It's the media's fault. It's the unfair critics. It's the economy. They focus relentlessly on the weaknesses of others or the circumstances that, they feel are holding them back.
We see that constantly in public life, don't we? The blaming of external forces for what might be internal failures or character flaws.
All the time. And the real problem with that mindset is that it's completely immobilizing.
Because you give up control.
Exactly. When you externalize all the blame, you basically relinquish your own agency.
Yeah.
So in this age of outrage, an outside-in leader will just spend all their energy fighting the circumstances of the criticism.
Rather than looking inside and addressing the core character flaw, or maybe the systemic weakness, that the criticism, however nasty or unfair it feels, might actually be pointing towards.
Right. They miss the antifragile opportunity because they're stuck in victim mode.
So to really move beyond this, leaders need to embody some fundamental, maybe even timeless virtues. You mentioned Cicero earlier, talking about justice and duty.
Yes, and Cicero's thoughts from thousands of years ago feel remarkably relevant right now. He highlights that while generosity, beneficence, being kind that feels harmonious with human nature, right? We like to be seen as generous.
Sure.
But he warns it has to be incredibly circumspect. You have to take utmost care that your kindness doesn't actually disadvantage the very people you're trying to help.
Or disadvantage others who might have a rightful claim.
Exactly. And this is where so much modern political or corporate action really falls down.
He had that really sharp critique of what he called wrongful generosity.
He did. His core argument is that nothing can be truly generous if it's not, at the same time, just.
Okay, explain that.
Well, he used historical examples from his time, like the Roman leaders Sulla and Caesar. They would take property from rightful owners.
And give it to their own supporters or soldiers.
Right. Now, on the surface, that looks like generosity. It certainly buys you quick fame and loyalty from the recipients.
But Cicero says it's fundamentally wrong.
Because it violates the prior, more sacred obligation of justice. You're harming one group unjustly to benefit another.
Okay, I can see how that applies today. Think about corporate philanthropy or big PR stunts.
Absolutely. A company might make a huge, highly publicized donation to some popular cause, A big show of generosity.
While at the same time, maybe they're maintaining unjust internal practices, like unfair wages, terrible working conditions, or maybe enacting massive layoffs that really injure long-serving employees just to boost the stock price.
That's wrongful generosity,
Yeah.
exactly. It's designed for the quick PR win, not based on principle, just action.
So Cicero's standard insists that real leadership is founded on duty, even when it means serious personal sacrifice. He called it duty in extremis.
Yes, a truly good person, a good leader, must be willing to endure personal discomfort, whether that's sickness, cold, poverty, or just intense criticism, rather than injure anyone else for their own personal benefit.
And then that leads to that really stark hypothetical scenario he poses.
Oh, it's amazing. Should a wise man, who is literally starving to death, take food from another man who is, quote, good for nothing?
And his answer is?
By no means. Absolutely not. Unless, and this is a tiny exception, unless that wise man's survival would render some great unique service to the state or to human society as a whole.
Okay, so there's a small window.
A very small one. And even then, he adds this critical, incredibly tight constraint. The action must be performed without self-esteem serving as a pretext for wrongdoing.
Wow. So you can't even use your own sense of importance, your belief that you're more valuable, as the justification for hurting someone else.
Never. That constraint is the absolute firewall against ego taking over. You cannot rationalize an unjust action by puffing up your own perceived value.
And this connects directly back to leading in the age of outrage. How?
If you lead with that kind of deep integrity and justice, your foundation is solid. You might still face criticism, of course, but you're facing it based on actions you believe were just. You're not relying on flattery or on unjust distributions done simply to look good and grab some quick fleeting popularity. Your core is sound.
And that integrity, that consistency, it can't just be the leader alone, right? It has to permeate the whole organization.
Yeah. Absolutely. Which brings us to ideas like the core ideology, from good to great. For a company to achieve enduring greatness, which is really what you need to survive long-term volatility, they have to discover and truly anchor themselves to their core values and a purpose that goes beyond just making money.
And that purpose can't just be words on a poster.
No, it has to be real. It has to drive all the behaviors, not just the select few convenient ones, the moment that purpose becomes inconsistent or looks performative.
The integrity breaks down, trust erodes, and the whole system becomes fragile again. People see through it.
Exactly. A really good example mentioned is the insurance leader AXA. They showed real consistency when they decided to divest from coal.
Why is that significant?
Well, their stated purpose is to act for human progress by protecting what matters, if that's truly your purpose.
Then continuing to invest heavily in an industry that's demonstrably accelerating climate risk, it doesn't line up.
It becomes inconsistent. And they are willing to take the potential financial hit to align their actual behavior with their core purpose. That kind of consistency builds immense trust and resilience when external criticism inevitably hits on other issues. People see you walk the talk.
Maintaining that kind of inner balance, that consistency against relentless external pressure, that sounds incredibly difficult psychologically.
It is, which is why the concept of transcendence found in texts like the Bhagavad Gita is so relevant here.
How does the Gita talk about this?
Well, it speaks of the highest spiritual state as being freedom from the dualities, things like desire and hate, honor and dishonor, misery and happiness.
So not getting yanked around by every piece of praise or criticism.
Exactly. For a leader who's facing constant public scrutiny, constant attacks, achieving that state, or at least striving for it, is incredibly practical. It's about not being emotionally whipped back and forth by the daily news cycle, by the latest Twitter storm.
But achieving that kind of, I don't know, equanimity when you're facing a potentially career-ending scandal, that must take serious practice.
Oh, absolutely. It's not a switch you flip. The text actually urges the person striving for this higher consciousness to be as tolerant as a tree. The phrase is tarorapi sehuna when facing impediments.
Tolerant as a tree. Unpack that for us.
Think about what a tree actually endures. It provides shade, it provides fruit, even while dealing with extreme environmental stress. It gets cut, it gets scorched by the sun, maybe struck by lightning.
Yet it continues its function.
Right. It doesn't lash out. It endures. For a leader, this means cultivating that kind of tolerance requires constant, incessant practice of a certain emotional detachment. It's absolutely necessary if you're facing public attacks that are often deeply personal and feel relentless.
That image of the tolerant tree is a powerful contrast to Well, the opposite kind of figure the text describes, the demoniac person.
Yes, the demoniac person in this context really represents the kind of leadership that is often the root cause of so much unnecessary strife and outrage.
How are they characterized?
They're driven by basically unlimited desire for money, for power. They act sinfully, immorally, and crucially, they believe only in their own personal strength, completely ignoring any higher law, any sense of consequence or accountability, like karma.
And that mindset leads to?
Inevitably, it leads to deep enmity, constant strife, conflict, eventually even war between persons, families, societies, nations. It's the ultimate manifestation, you could say, of the destructive potential within the age of outrage.
So a leader with integrity needs to cultivate that internal tolerance, that tree-like quality.
Precisely to resist becoming that demoniac person, swept away by ego and desire, creating more conflict.
Okay, so we've established the importance of the leader's internal state, their integrity, mindset, tolerance. But now we need to shift focus a bit. You can't just rely on individuals being virtuous, right? You need systems.
Exactly. Organizational systems are critical for handling volatility effectively. You have to build mechanisms that allow truth, critique, and even dissent to surface safely and constructively.
So how do you build that? Where do you start?
Well, one key principle is to institutionalize debate. Make it normal, not exceptional.
Like argue more.
Not necessarily argue more, but make healthy debate a constant feature. According to the principles in Radical Candor, debate shouldn't just happen when there's a massive crisis forcing a difficult conversation.
It should be happening all the time.
Constantly, on a well-functioning team, you have to actively build the muscle and tolerance for discussion and dissension. Make it okay to disagree, productively.
So it's like that continuous low-level stress testing we talked about earlier with antifragility, applied internally.
Precisely. If you avoid all internal disagreement, if everyone's too scared to speak up, you're just creating that fragility again. You're suppressing the small stressors.
And that continuous debate, does it have a name?
It relates to a concept called self-organizing criticality. The idea is that lots of small, localized corrections, disagreements, debates, adjustments, they actually create a natural stability over time.
How does that work?
They prevent pressure from building up silently until it causes one massive centralized catastrophe later on. It's like small tremors releasing energy instead of one giant earthquake.
And the leader's role in this is crucial.
Absolutely. Leaders have to decide, are they primarily debaters themselves trying to dominate the discussion, impose their own answers? Or are they debate makers? Leaders who actually spark rigorous, healthy discussion, draw out different viewpoints, and then allow the best ideas to emerge from the collective intelligence of the team.
Like the difference between multipliers and diminishers.
Exactly like that. Diminishers shut down intelligence by imposing their will. Debate makers multiply it by fostering productive conflict.
Is there a model for doing this really well? An example?
I think the gold standard, often cited, for institutionalizing intense but benevolent feedback is Pixar's brain trust model.
Ah, yes, the animation studio. How does their brain trust work?
It's essentially a formal peer review structure. Everyone at Pixar who has successfully directed a film gets together to review the current work in progress of another director.
So it's your peers who've been in your shoes.
Exactly. And the atmosphere is described as being brutally honest, yet somehow entirely supportive. It's like a panel of expert consulting doctors called in for a really confounding case.
Everyone has an equal voice.
In the discussion, yes, everyone's feedback carries weight. But, and this is crucial, the director of the film being reviewed retains complete creative authority. They listen to all the feedback, but they make the final call. It's not critique by committee.
Someone described it as a benevolent eye of Sauron.
Yes, that's a great description. Its gaze is unavoidable, it sees everything.
Yeah.
But its ultimate focus is on helping you succeed, on making the film better.
Why is it so effective, do you think?
Well, the filmmakers themselves often describe these sessions as necessarily painful.
Painful?
Yeah, because the brain trust forces the director to make a crucial pivot. They have to move from creating the story primarily for themselves, based on their own internal biases, their initial passion,
to creating it for the audience.
Precisely. The brain trust mercilessly exposes the gaps between the director's intent and what the audience is actually experiencing on screen. It provides that essential, sometimes painful input needed to make the story work for others.
And Pixar actually learned a really important lesson about this, about antifragility, from a big, expensive failure, right? Something about blue-footed newts.
That's right. They had a film and production, apparently, about blue-footed newts. It just wasn't working. It had stalled creatively. They'd even done an enthusiastic presentation to the media about it.
Uh-oh.
But internally, they knew the story was broken. And they made the incredibly tough call to shut it down completely, which was obviously hugely expensive.
So how could that possibly be seen as a good thing?
Well, afterwards, the leadership concluded that the mistake, the cost, was actually worth the investment.
Worth the investment.
Because the company learned some critical lessons from that failure. They learned how to better balance embracing new, maybe risky ideas with, crucially, ensuring they had explicit buy-in and commitment from all the key leaders responsible for the project much earlier in the process.
So the lesson wasn't don't fail.
No, the lesson wasn't about avoiding risk altogether. It was actually that being too risk-averse, clinging to a bad idea just because you're afraid of the cost of failure or changing course, is actually far more terrifying in the long run.
That makes sense.
The organization has to be willing to take calculated chances, embrace experimentation, and have a feedback system, like the brain trust, that might cause some internal trauma, but ultimately forces necessary corrections. That's gaining from disorder.
Okay, none of these systems, the debate, the brain trust, none of it works unless there's a really solid foundation of trust, right?
Absolutely fundamental. If people don't trust each other, if they don't feel psychologically safe,
Then feedback just becomes weaponized. It gets personal and malicious, not helpful.
exactly. And that's where the framework from the 5 dysfunctions of a team comes in. It all starts with building trust. And that, according to Lencioni, requires leaders to overcome the basic human need for invulnerability.
Leaders have to be willing to be vulnerable first.
Yes. They have to be willing to show weakness, admit mistakes, ask for help. If the leader projects this image of always being perfect, always having the answer, never being wrong,
And then the team will never risk speaking truth to power. They'll never offer that crucial, honest feedback.
precisely, trust evaporates.
And sometimes building that trust, maintaining that health, means having really difficult, high-stakes confrontations.
It does. There's an example in the book about the CEO, Catherine, having to confront an executive named Mikey who was described as obliviously difficult.
Obliviously difficult. Ouch.
Yeah, his behavior was disruptive, demotivating, but he seemed completely unaware of his impact. Catherine couldn't just ignore it because it was damaging the team.
So how does she handle it?
She had to confront him, but do it in a way that wasn't just a personal attack. It required calmness, but also really firm, specific accusations. She couldn't just say, "You're being difficult."
She had to give concrete examples.
Yes. Things like, "Mikey, when you interrupt your colleagues constantly, it seems like you don't respect them." Or pointing out his extremely distracting and demotivating impact during specific meetings. Being specific makes it harder to dismiss.
That kind of direct, specific confrontation, though, it relies heavily on empathy, doesn't it? You have to be able to have that conversation without completely shaming the other person.
Absolutely. And this connects beautifully to Brené Brown's research on shame resilience.
What does she say about shame?
Her core finding is that shame simply cannot survive exposure. When you share your story, your vulnerability, your mistake, with someone who responds with genuine empathy and understanding, the shame starts to dissipate.
So when a leader provides that kind of psychological air, that non-judgmental space, even during a tough conversation,
It's a massive deposit into the team's emotional bank account, as Covey would call it. It builds trust even through conflict.
and doing that effectively requires practicing what Covey called diagnosing before prescribing.
Yes. Seeking first to understand, which is the absolute heart of empathic listening.
But that's hard, isn't it? Really listening to understand, especially when you're hearing criticism.
It's incredibly hard
Yeah.
and risky. It takes immense internal security for a leader to genuinely open themselves up to be influenced by the perspective of someone else, especially someone delivering difficult news or critique. You have to be willing to potentially change your mind.
But it's critical for effectiveness.
Absolutely critical. If the people you lead don't feel fundamentally heard and understood,
Yeah.
you'll never achieve maximum synergy or interdependent production. And those systems of critique we talked about, like the brain trust, they'll just fail because people won't feel safe enough to use them honestly.
Okay, so we have empathy, trust, systems for critique. But sometimes, especially in a crisis, you also need clear, decisive command rate.
Definitely. This brings us back to military strategy, specifically the Navy SEAL concept of commander's intent.
Commander's intent, what is that?
In really volatile, high-pressure, fast-moving situations like combat, or frankly, like managing a major corporate crisis leaders at the top must articulate their commander's intent with absolute clarity.
Which is?
It's the overarching goal of the mission, the why. What does success ultimately look like? What's the single most important thing we need to achieve?
And why is that so important?
Because when the frontline teams, the people actually executing the mission on the ground, dealing with the immediate chaos, when they deeply understand the why, the ultimate desired outcome.
They can make smart decisions in the moment.
Exactly. They can be decisive. They can adapt to unforeseen circumstances without having to run every single tiny tactical question up the chain of command, which would just paralyze everything.
So that clarity prevents deadlock when volatility hits. It enables faster, better execution.
Which is often the absolute difference between success and failure in a crisis situation. Clear intent empowers decentralized execution.
And tying this all back together to that core idea of organizational integrity, the foundation for all of this, the trust, the critique, the intent, it seems to be mutual loyalty, fiercely protected.
Beautifully put. And we can go back to Steve Jobs and the early days of Pixar for a powerful example of this.
What happened there?
Well, apparently right at Pixar's founding, when it was just a small group with big ambitions and facing huge uncertainty, Jobs made this explicit, really profound commitment to loyalty.
What did he say?
He basically insisted, whatever happens, no matter how tough it gets, we have to be loyal to each other.
And that wasn't just talk.
Apparently not. That deep commitment is credited with sustaining the company through incredibly hard times, periods of financial strain where, frankly, any other typical investor probably would have pulled the plug and given up.
So that loyalty was the bedrock.
It was the bedrock that allowed things like the brain trust to even function. People knew they were safe to give that tough, honest feedback because there was this underlying commitment to the group's survival and success, stemming right from the top.
And Jobs himself, despite, his reputation for being difficult sometimes, he became the champion of that loyalty, especially for the creative teams.
Yes. He was described by Ed Catmull, Pixar's co-founder, as the creative firewall.
Creative firewall.
Meaning he acted as this fierce protector. He shielded the creative people at Pixar, kept them creatively safe from the often brutal commercial pressures and studio politics of Hollywood.
So that mutual, almost ferocious loyalty between the team members and from the leader protecting the team, that's what allows all the vulnerability, the intense feedback, the risk-taking
to actually flourish. It creates the psychological safety net that allows the system, the team, the organization to become truly anti-fragile. Because people know they can stumble, give tough feedback, try things, and the core commitment remains.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a ton of ground here. From the psychological practice of tolerance like a tree, to corporate critique systems at Pixar, to ancient Roman concepts of justice.
It's been a journey.
To try and synthesize this whole deep dive into some actionable strategy for leading in this age of outrage, it feels like we've established maybe 4 core pillars.
I think that sounds right. What's the first one?
First, you have to embrace volatility. See criticism, shocks, disruptions, not as imminent destruction, but as necessary stressors that can actually strengthen your system. That's antifragility. Your structure has to be ready somehow to gain from the disorder.
Right. Pillar 2.
Second, build that inside-out character. Focus on fundamental integrity and justice. Remember Cicero's warning. Nothing is truly generous unless it's also just. Your core has to be changeless, built on that sense of duty and extremis, and maybe finding that internal tolerance like the Geet suggests.
Excellent. Third pillar.
Third, create the organizational systems. You need structures that actively foster intense but crucially benevolent feedback and debate. Think Pixar's brain trust. That constant critique prevents catastrophic failure by achieving that, self-organizing criticality.
Exactly. Lots of small corrections.
Yeah.
And the final pillar.
And finally, lead with that mutual loyalty, with empathy, and with crystal clear intent. Make sure the frontline truly understands the commander's intent, and ensure that leadership acts as that creative firewall, providing the safety needed for people to be vulnerable, take risks, and grow.
That sums it up beautifully. Embrace stress, build integrity, foster critique, lead with loyal intent.
So to wrap up this deep dive, there's a really poignant anecdote about the Athenian leader Pericles on his deathbed. It seems to capture the ultimate measure of enduring leadership, especially in an age like ours, filled with scrutiny.
Oh yes, it's a powerful story. Tell us.
So, Pericles is dying. He's surrounded by his friends, his closest allies. And they're gathered around, sort of reminiscing, loudly praising all his great exploits. The military victories, the battles won, the monuments built, all these feats of strength and strategy. many of which, frankly, relied heavily on good fortune as much as skill.
Right, the kind of things leaders often get praised for.
Exactly. And Pericles is lying there, seemingly unconscious, but he's actually listening to their whole conversation. And then suddenly, he breaks his silence.
What does he say?
He expresses surprise. He says he's surprised they're focusing so much on these accomplishments, these things that depended so much on fortune or on the strength of others, while they were completely neglecting what he considered his greatest, his most glorious title to fame.
Which was?
He said, "No Athenian ever wore black because of me."
Wow. Stop and think about that standard.
No Athenian ever wore black because of me, meaning because of his actions, his decisions, his leadership. No citizen had been unjustly killed, exiled, or suffered a preventable tragedy that would cause their family to go into mourning.
It's a staggering standard, isn't it? The ultimate measure of his legacy, in his own eyes, wasn't the power he amassed or the victories he won. It was the harm he avoided, the justice he maintained, ensuring his actions didn't result in irreversible tragedy for the very people he served.
And that standard connects so directly to the kind of political philosophy that underpins any kind of enduring, stable governance, doesn't it?
It really does. You think about the Federalist Papers, for instance. They noted that government itself is perhaps the greatest of all reflections on human nature.
How so?
Because it requires devices, mechanisms to control the governed, yes, obviously. But just as critically, it requires mechanisms to oblige the government to control itself.
Self-control as the foundation of legitimate authority.
Exactly. So, the ultimate resilience in this age of outrage, perhaps, is rooted fundamentally in the leader's capacity for that kind of self-control, for ensuring their actions consistently reflect that changeless core of human fellowship, that basic respect for justice and dignity.
That common harmony that Cicero talked about, viewing it as the closest bond established among men by the gods.
Precisely. If your systems, your personal integrity, and your ultimate intent are genuinely rooted in that fundamental commitment to justice and human fellowship,
then the intense volatility, the outrage, the criticism of this age, it becomes more like a refining fire.
a refining fire rather than a purely destructive one. It tests you, yes. It forces adaptation. But it doesn't have to consume you if the core is sound. And that work, the constant, difficult work of maintaining internal consistency under relentless external pressure, that I think is the enduring challenge left for you, the learner, to grapple with.